Hi, I'm Julie Wright, and I'm with Shadow Mountain's Proper Romance Line, and I am here to read to you today from Josi Kilpack's Daisies and Devotion. We'll read the first chapter. Josi Kilpack is one of my very favorite authors. She's also, gratefully, one of my very best friends and somebody I love and admire very much. You are going to love this book, and if you haven't read it already, I encourage you to go out and do so, and I encourage you to read all of Josi's books and all of Shadow Mountain's Proper Romance Line because they're pretty fantastic. So let's get started. Chapter 1, Wednesday, April 10th, 1822. After 2 minutes of sitting, Timothy was on his feet, walking the perimeter of the drawing room and looking over each of the excellent paintings on the wall. He'd never been one to sit still for very long. Miss Morrington's father, Sir Wayne Morrington, had recently restored this house, so the corners were crisp and the design wonderfully modern. Sir Wayne had invested in gaslights back when other men turned their noses at the idea, and this house had been one of the first homes in London with the innovation. Had it not been the middle of the afternoon, the copper lamp hanging from the ceiling would have kept the lovely room bright. Sir Wayne had done very well for himself, to be sure, and though the ton might dismiss men of trade, when those men did as well as Sir Wayne had done, they opened their doors and forgot their prejudice. Timothy heard movement and turned toward the doorway, in time to see Marianne Morrington enter, her maid following behind. Miss Morrington's sister, Deborah, must not be available to attend them today. The maid went straight to the chair in the far corner that Timothy suspected was there specifically for those poor servants who had to attend their charges through such visits as these. His mother had been a maid, a scandal that kept Timothy mindful of the very thin margin that separated him from the serving class. But life was too short and too beautiful to be spent thinking of the darker corners of things. Timothy amplified his smile and crossed the room to bow over Miss Morrington's hand. He did not kiss her knuckles, but added a flourish and put his foot forward to exaggerate the bow. The dramatic gesture usually made girls giggle, but not Miss Morrington. "You look as lovely as the morning, Miss Morrington," he said as he straightened. She blinked golden brown eyes and pulled her eyebrows together so that a line showed between them. "The morning is quite grey, Mr. Mayfield." "Is it?" Timothy glanced out one of the unusually large windows. Lovely windows, truly. The sky was indeed grey. He turned back to her and shrugged good-naturedly. "Well, the temperature is wonderfully mild. I did not even need my greatcoat, though I wore it all the same. Fancy a walk through Hyde Park so that I might prove that even a grey day can be lovely when one has good company." Rather than clap her hands and run for her bonnet, Miss Morrington sat on one end of the green and yellow striped settee. "All right, then." Following her example, he sat in one of the green velvet chairs across from her, a round table between them. The fireplace had been lit, which made the temperature of the room very comfortable. "Sadly, I've had a head cold, and am therefore disinclined to go out." He sobered. "Ah, I see. It is completely miserable to have a cold in spring. You have my condolences." He refrained from adding that the upside was that she could lay abed and read all day as she recovered. Timothy loved to lay abed and read when he was under the weather. Not everyone appreciated his pointing out such silver linings when they were not feeling well, however. She smiled, her already round cheeks plumping even more, but it wasn't a happy smile. Poor girl. "When do you think you might feel better?" Timothy asked, when she did not add words to her response. There came that line between her brows again, and this time with a mild air of exasperation. Gracious, had only been in her company a minute and a half, and he was already wearing her thin. That did not bode well for his suit. "I have no idea when I might feel better, Mr. Mayfield." Yes, that was frustration in her tone. Had he been rude? She folded her hands in her lap. I'm afraid the malady did not check in with an expected date of expiration. Timothy laughed and feigned a parry with an invisible sword. "Touché, Miss Morrington." He assumed an exaggerated frown. "There are few things worse than a lingering illness." "What might I do to help you feel better?" Her expression softened and her spirits lifted in personal victory. Miss Morrington did not smile easily, perhaps because her mother had died only 7 months ago, or maybe because her father had not come to London with them. She must miss him. But that was all the more reason for her to seek out joy now that she was out of mourning. Besides, coaxing a smile from her was worth twice the victory as that from another debutante, because it was so mindfully given. Suddenly inspired, Timothy jumped to his feet. "I have it," he proclaimed, pointing at the ceiling. "I shall act out a scene for you, and you might apply your mind to guessing what scene it is. Would you like that, Miss Morrington? Her expression froze somewhat between a scowl and a smile. Act out a scene? What are you talking about, Mr. Mayfield? He wagged his eyebrows and surveyed the room for props. He hurried toward a round vase and held it up toward the windows, ignoring the slight gasp from the maid in the corner. He would not be distracted. He put his other hand on his chest and began to mouth the words and pantomime the actions associated with Hamlet's soliloquy to poor Yorick's skull, who did not adore Hamlet. Timothy attended plays as often as possible, and he had even acted out a part in a production or two when he had been at Oxford. When he reached the midpoint of the pantomime speech, he turned on his heel toward the other side of the room, then fell upon his knees as he silently begged the jester's help in making his lady laugh. In the final moment, Timothy pulled the vase to his chest and bowed his head. He counted to 3 and then peered up at his audience of 1. Miss Morrington was smiling and shaking her head. Oh, Mr. Mayfield, you're a jester all your own. Jester? Timothy repeated, putting one hand behind his ear and leaning toward her. Is that your guess on this scene I have so expertly acted out for your benefit? She laughed out loud this time, a short punching laugh, almost like a man's. He only just suppressed a shudder. He had heard her laugh from afar, but never up close. Most unfeminine. You are Hamlet, addressing Yorick, of course. Of course. He got to his feet, adopting a stiff and offended posture, while putting his free hand on his hip as though he were a fishwife. Do not damage my pride by insinuating that any number of other suitors have come into this room and dazzled you with this display of this particular scene. Her smile fell. He reviewed his words, but could not guess where he had misspoken. Have I said something amiss? He took his hand from his hip to better fit the change of mood. Suitors, she repeated. That was what had drawn her attention. He'd all but stood on his head like a monkey, and what caught her mind was the word suitors. He returned the vase to its place and sat back in the chair across from her. That word upset you? Not necessarily. She shook her head, some girlish insecurity breaking through her usually confident demeanor. Timothy did not mind Miss Morrington's advanced age of 22, but he was still getting used to the difference between her more measured ways and those of the young debutante, so eager to have a man's attention. Those younger girls simpered and pouted and pranced without restraint. It was all rather exhausting. Miss Morrington, on the other hand, watched carefully, spoke slowly, and did not give many hints as to what she was thinking. She sniffled, and he fetched his handkerchief from the inside pocket of his coat and offered it to her. Thank you, she said, as she took the proffered handkerchief and dabbed at her nose. In the meantime, that flash of insecurity he'd seen in her expression faded back into politeness. He literally watched as her back straightened and her chin came up, restoring her to her regal pose. She fit London and its manners very well, and made those younger girls look rather silly. Are you a suitor, Mr. Mayfield? He felt as though to answer badly would end with a boot in his backside. Not her boot, of course, but her butler's. In school, Timothy had often been singled out from his classmates after failing to keep quiet through a lecture. The teacher would demand Timothy repeat back the point of the lesson, which, of course, Timothy had not heard because he was engaged in a discussion with his neighbor about what games they might play after class. Am I not a suitor, Miss Morrington? She watched him a moment, then looked at his handkerchief in her hand. I have not been certain whether your intentions were specific or whether we were simply friends. Well, we are friends. Timothy grinned wider than necessary in hopes to ease her worries. But as I hear it, friends make the very best of suitors. He winked and was rewarded with the teeniest pink of her full cheeks. Are you a suitor because you have learned of my inheritance? I suspect it has been whispered about, despite my family's attempts to keep it from the gossip-mongers of the town. She glanced toward her maid, who gave her a sympathetic smile. Apparently, this had been the topic of discussion between the two of them. Timothy was unsure of the right way to answer. It was gauche to discuss money, but rude to ignore a direct question. When he did not answer, Miss Morrington cocked her head to the side, held him with her golden brown eyes, and spoke in a soft but still strong voice. If you care for me at all, Mr. Mayfield, I would ask that you be honest. Are you here because of my fortune? He would not be any kind of gentleman or friend if he did not honor the sincerity of her question. Plus, Timothy was not a dishonest man, fun-loving, overly optimistic, energetic, engaging, and silly to some. Yes, but not dishonest. I am here, first and foremost, because I am your friend, he smiled. But she did not. But I am aware of your inheritance. Her shoulders fell a bit. From whom did you learn of it? Did Lucas tell you? No. He would not want to cast doubt on his friend's reputation, not when Lucas was married to Marianne's sister, Deborah, and had been the one to introduce him to Miss Morrington. I regret to have to confirm that your inheritance has been quite the topic in town these last 2 weeks. She smiled, which he had not expected, but then she had been hard to read from the beginning. She would sometimes get irritated when he expected her to laugh, and now she smiled when he thought she'd be upset. Women were mad. Heaven help the men who tried to make sense of them and who were flogged for their attempts. Not actual flogging, of course, metaphorical flogging. Timothy felt sure he'd suffered a couple of lashes already in this conversation, though he'd be hard-pressed to go back and find where he'd earned the punitive measures. Thank you for your honest answer, she said, in a tired voice. I've had half a dozen gentlemen call upon me, unexpectedly, and I had wondered if my fortune might be the reason. I asked 2 others, and they assured me they did not know what I was talking about, but I knew they were hiding something. At least I no longer have to guess the reasons behind their sudden interest. Half a dozen? Timothy's mouth went dry at the thought of having that much competition. It would be uncomfortable not to trust the motives of such visits. She fixed him with those golden brown eyes again. Yes, it has been. What then should I think of your motivation? Your boldness leaves me quite unbalanced, Miss Morrington. She smiled again, but the expression was not entirely comfortable on her face, and though it covered a more honest expression, she did not want to show him. A woman of known fortune can hardly be blamed for boldness, Mr. Mayfield. Rather, she would be a fool to be anything but bold. So is your motivation in calling on me as a suitor the same as the others? Are you in need of making a moneyed match? Timothy squirmed in his chair. This was a most unexpected conversation. You say it as though I have never called on you before. I only learned of your inheritance a fortnight ago, and yet you and I have enjoyed one another's company several times before that. When Miss Morrington had first arrived in London several weeks ago, she was still in mourning, though she was wearing grey and not black. He first sought her company to please Lucas, who wanted his wife's sister to feel welcomed in London. She'd had her coming out in Somerset when she was 16, but when her mother fell ill shortly thereafter, she became her mother's companion and caregiver for the next 5 years. After her mother passed last September, Marianne Morrington could not put off the necessity of a season in London, but she had refused to end her mourning period until a full 6 months after her mother's death. Though Marianne had attended society events those first weeks, she had not danced nor stayed past 11 o'clock. Timothy would seek her out at the events they both attended and found her a good conversationalist and an excellent listener. At the Guthrie's ball last week, he had made a point to be the first man to ask her to dance, now that she was wearing colours. And here he was today, calling on her as he had promised to do that night. Miss Morrington held his eyes in such a way that he worried she knew exactly what he was charting out in his mind while she waited for his answer. Oh, rubbish. He cleared his throat and reminded himself that his primary goal in pursuing a wife was to not hurt anyone. You ask if I'm here because of your fortune, and I will tell you the truth. He paused a moment. I do consider us friends, Miss Morrington, but my more specific attention is indeed partly influenced by the fact that your circumstance could be a boon to my own. Her eyes widened in surprise, and he continued, not wanting to lose his momentum or his courage. I am without security, as I believe is also whispered about amid the tongue. They track heiresses with the same ferocity as they track penniless men. I have always known I would need to marry a woman with means, and therefore I have kept my formal attentions focused in that way. Her jaw hardened, but he hurried to speak before she could shred him. However, if I possess no other attribute to offer a woman, let me assure you that I know my own mind and my own heart enough to know that I could never marry only for fortune. I will remain a bachelor all my life if the only other choice is a loveless marriage. He smiled, hoping she would take some of his energy and put it in her pocket. I hope to find a woman of means to whom I could also give my heart. And so, while I would never have said so much without your invitation, I implore you to take me at my word, and know that I am paying you particular attention in hopes that my heart and your heart might somehow connect and find that they cannot live without one another. If that ends up not to be the case, I hope we will continue as friends as we seek our separate happiness. Timothy knew he was regarded as a well-known flirt after so many years in London honing his skills in the business of finding a wife. He loved to make a woman smile, but he was mindful of who he asked to dance, how often he danced with any one individual, and especially how he sought out a woman's attention, such as calling on her at her home. His rules kept him from leading women on or becoming too invested in a woman he could not marry. It was wise and fair, but exhausting. He was a man of heart, and yet he could not lead with his in this. Miss Morrington had watched him closely as he spoke, but kept her expression cool. When he finished, silence threatened to flatten the room. Timothy was not very good with silences. He curled his toes toward the floor inside his shoes to give him something to focus on. The big toe of his right foot was rather sore, on account of the 2 small boots he'd bought from a distinguished bootmaker. The boots had been commissioned and then returned by a man far wealthier than Timothy because the man felt the buckle too large. Timothy had been able to buy the offendingly buckled boots at a deep discount, though it still emptied his clothing budget for the quarter. Timothy had worn them to the ball last night and had been suffering ever since. Do not speak, he told himself while trying not to tap his foot. Count to 10, forward then backward. Give her some time. She'll fill the silence herself eventually. Won't she? Finally she cleared her throat. Praise the heavens. I must say I am completely shocked by your honesty, Mr. Mayfield. I did not expect it. He grinned, liking that he'd surprised her. One wonders why you asked, then. Because a man is easier to read when he is lying. Her quick and confident answer brought him up short. When a man is lying to me, I can see it in the way he banks his eyes, and in the particular tightness about his ears. Tight ears? Timothy raised a hand to the side of his head, ever so glad he had not lied. She continued, To ask a man hard questions allows me to read straight through him. To have him tell me the truth, however. She leaned back in her chair and cocked her head. Only her soft smile kept him at ease. Well, I am completely perplexed. Timothy leaned forward and smiled again. You are not the first person to tell me I am rather perplexing. Miss Morrington laughed another brash, unfeminine laugh. Then she sobered, though the corners of her mouth stayed uplifted, which he took to be another victory. With a little luck and my cook's excellent garlic soup, I hope I shall be feeling better in a few days' time. I hope you will call on me again, Mr. Mayfield. A walk in Hyde Park sounds lovely. Inside, Timothy jumped for joy. Truth will out. He was officially tired of the hunt for a wife, and was instead eager to marry and settle. He was looking forward to trading in the stress of the London seasons in favor of hosting parties and making connections. He hoped that more time with Miss Morrington would confirm their compatibility, so he could be through with the marriage mart and on to a family of his own. I shall call on you for that walk as soon as I return to London, he said. Return? She asked, raising her eyebrows. Oh, did I not mention that? I am leaving for my uncle's estate in Norrington tomorrow, you see, and I shall be gone through the weekend. The invitation had arrived a few days ago with a note saying that Uncle Elliot had something to present to Timothy. Timothy hoped it was a horse. Never mind that he did not have the means to keep a horse. Perhaps Uncle Elliot would include a stipend for such consideration. Uncle Elliot had financially supported Timothy all his life, if not in luxury, in comfort and generosity that Timothy did not take lightly. It was not Uncle Elliot's obligation, yet he had taken on the responsibility when Timothy's parents had not planned accordingly. Timothy smiled at Miss Morrington. If you're still under heavy skies when I return, I shall act out another scene for you. He turned his head slightly and narrowed his eyes at her in mock reprimand, though I will expect applause for a second performance. She laughed again. He suppressed another wince and reminded himself that a man in need of a fortune could not be too particular. So, there you have it. Josi Kilpack's Daisies and Devotion. It is a fantastic book about marrying for love and marrying for money, and I'm sure you will love it as much as I have loved it. I'm sure you'll love all of Josi's books and all of the Shadow Mountains proper romance line. And I hope you have a great day and a great quarantine, and I wish you all well. Thanks. Bye.